start might be just your background and how long you've worked in the tech industry, and then we can kind of go from there.
Okay, sure. Sounds good. Yeah, I can kind of give a brief background of what I'm all about, and then maybe that'll help kind of guide the questions and stuff. So I've been in the tech space for about close to 20 years, 18 years. So when I was very young, I got very interested in kind of coding, programming, all of those things. And then I was lucky enough in the 90s, that was the dawn of the internet. So kind of timed it right a little bit that you get interested in that. I came to Edmonton here. I'm from a small town in Saskatchewan. So I came to Edmonton for U of A to take computer sciences. And I started out with a startup in Edmonton, actually, called Investopedia. They're like an investing online. They're decently well known in that kind of investing space. So worked with them for many years. They sold that startup, and those two co-founders, went off, and I continued to do consulting and tech stuff, and had tons of gigs through consulting. Worked in the U.S. for the U.S. military for a while. Did a ton of government work here in Edmonton. Built a lot of those systems out and stuff like that. And in the last 3 years, I've rejoined the original founders of that Investopedia way back in the day. They got the band back together, and they're focused on like machine learning and AI in that space. So working with companies to kind of build out all this fancy machine learning and AI stuff and enable other companies to use that in their business. So that's basically the quick and dirty history of me. I'm sure there is a lot of there's a lot of stuff in there that we could get into, but yeah, it would just depend. I'm interested in, like you said, you were looking for an on-ramp, specific kind of things that interest you, or you're looking to get in. I'm sure I could kind of help, or at least kind of talk about some of that stuff. So.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay, that's interesting. So in a way, your background isn't entirely different from mine. Like I come from the U of A as well.
Yeah.
So a long time ago, like 20 years ago now, 20, more than that, more like 25, I suppose, went to the U of A, took microbiology, discovered about a year in that I took a computer class. I really enjoyed it. I decided I was going to kind of angle off into bioinformatics. Bioinformatics wasn't a program yet at the U of A, and so I kind of tried to cobble together. There was a bioinformatics group. There was there was an internship for a summer, and I worked with them. But basically tried to cobble together some mathematics classes, some statistics classes, computer classes, tag them on to my what became my cell biotechnology specialization, and so did that. Graduated from that, went and worked in a genome center in Montreal for 4 years. Really good experience. Montreal is a great city. and that was kind of a startup at that time too. It was just, they were just like opening up the big genome centers in Canada. So part of a small kind of adjunct group, comparative genomics group to the sequencing platform there. Then decided to go to law school, silly me. So George Bush happened. So figured, oh, I got to fix things. Went to law school, still wanted to kind of angle off in the direction of the computers though. Never really wanted to leave the computer industry. I wanted to be able to do like bioinformatics, computer stuff applied to biology. I wanted to do computer stuff as applied to law. Graduated year 2010, like economy was in the dumps. I couldn't find work. I kind of had a bit of foreshadowing in some of my internships that it might be like this. Like my background is, it's biological sciences with computer science tacked on. Things were getting a little bit tighter then, and yeah, basically I couldn't find an inroad back into the industry, and I didn't want to work for a law firm. I didn't want to be a lawyer. And so that option quickly got cut off for me. Tried a couple of different angles in terms of trying to get back into the industry. my big thing was coming out of the Genome Center, you knew information issues in the abstract were going to become a big deal. There were going to be problems on the horizon just in terms of the underlying lay of the land changing. That was going to challenge certain institutions like insurance in terms of like health information and stuff like that. Pharmacogenomics was one of the things that they were working on at the Genome Center at the time. And like the implications of some of that stuff. And then Facebook happened, and nothing got regulated. And I honestly think, like anybody with a law degree, kind of got stiff-armed during that period because it was you were going to look like more trouble than you were worth, which was probably going to be true because nothing was being regulated. And yeah, I guess I hammered away on various aspects of IT for about 5 years, no inroad. I couldn't tell whether it was the fact that, like, you know, I didn't have the right skill set, or whether it was people were looking down their nose at me because I was a lawyer who obviously had failed at something. Yeah, so anyway, long story short, fell into depression, discovered I had some autistic tendencies, which kind of complicated things. I would say up until very recently, I was profoundly dysfunctional because, and I have a very dim view about the prospects of the world right now. Let me put it that way. I think we missed some steps. We missed some things about 10 years ago. Well, actually, it was more like 15 years ago, and then 10 years ago, like after George Bush, Obama administration, that was the Hail Mary territory, and we just didn't do anything there either. And now it's frigging too late.
Seems like there's been a lot of changes over the last couple of years when it comes to that. So Kevin, do you want to kind of maybe talk more specifically about where you're hoping to go in the next couple of years? Like what area of tech? I know you've mentioned data analysis previously. What are you kind of looking at?
Well, at this point, I'm not interested in like trying to save the world. At this point, I just like a job. At this point, I'd like to just be able to get a foothold in the IT industry so that I can program. I love programming. I was a database guy at the Genome Center, so everything was open source. So MySQL guy. So I have some familiarity with that. It's not my first love, but yeah. I'd like to be able to get my foot back in the door that way, because I think I still have some skills there. The world has changed. Like event-driven programming, like JavaScript, has understandably taken over. Didn't see that coming, but yeah. So A, want to get back. Would like to try to get a foot back into the market. B, I don't operate well without structure. Like I did well in university. I did well at the Genome Center. I did okay in law school. Wasn't a great student, but I don't operate well without structure. and it's doubly so when everything requires such a time investment, and you come to think that, you know, this might not be going anywhere anyway, because like you invest a couple of years in it and the world has moved on and changed, and you don't even know if it's you or
in IT. You're right. IT shifts around so much that very true.
It's crazy. I kind of knew that when I was younger, theoretically. I didn't live it. Now I've lived it. I actually am in the same situation as some people I knew back then. Well, not quite, probably a bit worse, my situation, but yeah, I mean.
So given sort of his background, Mike, do you have any suggestions for him with having, you know, that gap in his resume and kind of being out of the tech field for a little bit? What would be some good first steps to look at?
Well, yeah, I can talk about it a bit. I guess like the good news is you actually have a decent background then, and it kind of depends on where you're going. So I can talk a bit like my day job. We're focused primarily on kind of that machine learning and AI, which is actually just statistics. So it's not anything, you know, it's not what the magazines tell you, and it's not futuristic. It's just applied statistics. So I mentioned, or you mentioned, like in your genomics and like the classes that you took, there would be a bit of statistics there. So like the IT is huge, and there will be many opportunities for different inroads and stuff. So if you go down, well, I'll talk a little bit about something that like stuck out in your kind of example there. There is a real need for people with industry experience or knowledge around a specific type of business. So one problem that we're seeing in AI and ML, we have these super smart statisticians and super smart comp sci programming guys that are amazing. But when you throw a problem at them, they don't know that domain very well. Like if you threw a genomics problem at them, they probably could code you something amazing, but because they like don't know that domain all that well, the stuff that gets built is maybe structurally built very nicely, but it's not overly useful because they didn't know like that the domain enough. One thing that's funny, a project that we're currently working on at the day job is the union of legal and AI and ML. So in case law, the ability to take like case law data and use AI and ML techniques to extract stuff out and build tools for lawyers that need to go through, you know, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure like the exact kind of use case here, but it's more around tooling for lawyers that have to look through old cases to find precedents and all of this stuff. And I think that's done traditionally probably by interns in that particular field, or maybe, you know, by legal assistants, and they're just going through it's probably digitized, but it doesn't sound like a very fun job. So like there is some opportunity here if you liked law or you liked genetics and you want to try to union your experience in the past with kind of your love for programming or your love to be in like that IT space, that there's definitely opportunity there. And it gives you would have an advantage because you have that, you know, you have that prior knowledge of that domain a bit, and you're interested in the coding and automation side of it. So I think like we've been reading a lot, there's big opportunity in the law space for automation, for AI and ML, because a lot of that stuff is yeah, pretty monotonous, like going through some of this stuff. And like we've even heard, so I heard a story in the UK, someone just built a little AI bot that if you have a parking ticket, you can upload a picture of your parking ticket and all that, and it would put together kind of, I guess in the UK, instead of going to court, you're allowed to mail in your argument or something. It's very strange, probably not the same in North America.
Yeah,
but it would kind of
chatbot, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it would automatically be doing some of that stuff. So like one thing that came to mind is if you still have a passion for that law experience that you're doing, or you still have a passion for that, you know, the kind of genetic stuff, a possible inroad here would be that. But it would depend on like what, and then you also mentioned that you're looking for something a little bit more structured. So I can tell you from someone I've worked for bigger organizations and startups, and now we're technically a scale up, whatever that means. So I would say you probably want to look towards like a mid or large sized company. The startup space will be very chaotic and not super structured. A lot of that like startup stuff, it can be really fun. But a lot of stuff is not there, like in a big company. In a big company, they'll have processes in place for like, this is how we do things. This is how stuff is built and delivered. In startup space, it's much more like, we have no idea what we're doing. I hope we don't run out of money. Like that's kind of the approach. So if you're looking for something a bit more structured, it would probably be, yeah, mid to large size company.
So I have a question with regards to that though.
Yeah.
So it seems like most people get, you know, they cut their teeth in smaller startups, and then they move on to larger companies because larger companies get the pick because they're more stable. You've got more room to move around. It's a good situation for a lot of people, right? So, so I don't know how competitive I'm going to be in order to try to get in with a larger company at this point, right?
Well, although you'd be surprised because like, so startups, the kind of people that gravitate to startups tend to be a little earlier in their career. You're right for that experience. But also startups don't pay maybe as well as those large. So like, you know, I want to say it takes a certain type of person to enjoy kind of the startup lifestyle. it can be fun, but it is chaotic, right? Like startups can just run out of money and then that's the end of it. But if you work for a larger company, they won't have that problem. But some people don't like the structure. Like it sounds like you really enjoy that structure. Some people sometimes don't like that. Like I've done a lot of work with government. Government is very structured. There's a lot more meetings, maybe more structure than there is that creativity and the coding stuff. And you'll get a blend of both. Like a startup, you'll have a lot less meetings, processes, that stuff. So you can be very creative because you can kind of do whatever you want to do, explore some stuff. But yeah, there's not as much guidance there, right? You're kind of just like left on your own in some cases because it could be a company of 20 people. So, you don't have a lot of mentorship opportunities in some of those spaces. Someone said it's like jumping out of an airplane and then you got to put the parachute together on the way down. So it's like that kind of feeling. But some people like that. So I don't know if it's the people will start in startups and then move to bigger companies. We've seen a lot of people be in bigger companies, maybe not liking that structure as much and then moving to startups. So there is a lot of opportunity, like still in a bigger company. You don't necessarily need to cut your teeth on a startup.
Yeah. So I should specify what I mean. Okay. So first of all, structure, yes. In general, yes. Like the one thing that I really do miss is we were part of a small, like at the Genome Center, for example, part of a small group there. There were about 5 of us. It was a good group. You had really smart people to interdisciplinary group. There was a really good ferment of ideas there. It was kind of a sweet time when you're at the beginning of something like that Genome Center there, where you have a bit of space until it becomes crunch time and and people start to panic. But that was the time when I was most effective. And I always thought that I never dreamed that I would be in this situation. Like I worked in that environment. B, 2 of my roommates, in that situation, were co-workers. Like I was totally immersed in this stuff at the time. I never dreamed that I would have trouble finding work.
Was it more development or what were you doing kind of that you really liked about it? What aspects of that job? Because maybe that'll help.
Well, I was the database guy. I didn't set out to be the database guy, but it kind of fell to me because I had more of an IT background than some of the other bioinformaticians at the time did. I was like, okay, so this is going to date me. So the language at that time was Perl. So everybody was using Perl. Yeah. Good language. I'd come out of school and I'd learned Python and I had learned Java. And so, and the big thing is I'd learned databases. So I kind of got pushed into that role. I wasn't so much the domain expert as I was the technical guy in that group.
Yes, so you kind of inherited being a technical guy. You kind of inherited that work a little bit, right?
Yeah. And this is the situation that repeats itself over and over again. Is you're behind the scenes. The other guys are in front. They kind of get the glory.
Yeah.
I think this happens everywhere, right?
Some roles are pretty selfless, unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
We say the same thing, right? That salespeople sell the amazing thing, but then the poor people building in the background, this is a unfortunate like fact of that kind of work. But
yeah,
it's a bit of selfless, but that's all right as long as it fulfills you, I guess.
But I mean, in truth, though, so there I was the technical guy, but relatively speaking, coming out a couple of years later, when there were actual bioinformatics programs and people had gone through those programs, I mean, other people had better technical backgrounds than I did, even probably back then, to be completely honest. They wouldn't have had my experience, but,
would you be looking, though, to get back? So, for one of the possible on-roads, data is still a big thing, even now, even more so now. A lot of these analytic systems and, even the AI space all relies on data. So data and the database technologies have changed, but the same need is there.
Well, that's interesting. Is it? I mean, so relational databases, I don't even know where that fits into things nowadays. Like it seems to me that a lot of stuff is still in the background relational, but up front where like people are actually, subject matter experts, where subject matter experts and stuff are dealing with it, it's NoSQL stuff, unstructured.
Yeah, you're right. Like, so what we've seen, you're right. There's been this rise of NoSQL and document store databases and stuff like that. But in the back end of high performing systems, so you'll see like NoSQL systems for front end products and things where you don't have to do a lot of maybe aggregation and reporting and doing all of this stuff, because NoSQL is great. Don't get me wrong, I use it all the time, but they don't perform very well under extreme data loads and doing aggregation and stuff. So like even in the AI and ML space, they don't use, they use, I'll say a relational database, but they use kind of this big table idea. So imagine a relational database where you didn't denormalize and you have one table with potentially 2,000 columns. Yep. So in that AI and ML space, that's called like featureization. So we'll use those databases, and it's a massive table of all of this stuff. But the schema, like it borrows a lot from relational databases, because in that NoSQL stuff, you don't have a defined schema. Like one row can have certain keys and the other row may or may not have those keys, right? So it becomes like very difficult to predict the schema. You can't have that when you have data systems and you have AI and ML. You need like a predictable schema for funneling a lot of that stuff through and creating the pipelines and things. So yeah, you're right. You'll see a lot of NoSQL in the like people that make products, phone apps, all of this stuff. Yeah, they tend to use like a lot of JavaScript there, a lot of NoSQL, because it's just convenient. It's just way easier to do that stuff. But if you're interested in more or have the experience more in relational, there is a ton of that relational stuff still there, but it's almost at it doesn't get the front page of the news in IT. All of this JavaScript stuff and NoSQL, that all gets, that's all the trendy stuff. But the reality of it in high performance scaling systems that need to be real time and all this, you have to use relational databases. You have to use high performing databases. Like you can't use NoSQL and that kind of stuff. So you'll still see a lot of that stuff. It's just not as cool anymore, if that makes sense.
So a question with regards to that. So so I can see how quick and dirty stuff with a NoSQL database and JavaScript, that would lend itself. There is another aspect to this. Like as data has scaled up, it's become about multiple processors and stuff and clusters and stuff like that. So the event, like JavaScript is probably the biggest surprise. The fact that they're they're using JavaScript on the server side now.
So yeah, I would say like that's another one of those trendy things. But in enterprise and in scalable systems, no one would write in Node and backend JavaScript. Like that stuff is like it is being used for really thin web services and stuff.
I thought it was efficient.
Scale and perform that well.
Okay, so. I always thought like so the event-driven aspect of JavaScript, which kind of came from producing web pages and stuff like that. You didn't know what was coming at you in the web page, and so you had to react.
Because that like reactive approach,
So that was great for web stuff, but it also ended up being useful for parallel processing stuff, didn't it? Like isn't that why?
Like, you're right. Like there's these libraries, they call them like reactive libraries, basically where you can compose multiple functions. Very good to parallelize things when you have clusters and multi-cores, especially good like with definitely machine learning and some of this other stuff. You're using a GPU, and GPUs are just like through 2,000 cores. So you want to parallelize stuff and you want to write it that way, right? So that you're right. That programming paradigm, very useful in not only front end and JavaScript. That's true.
And that's exactly what I lack. And I've tried developing it. Like I've tried practicing JavaScript, but it's not. if I have a real problem, I end up falling back on Python because it's what I know, and because you can usually program your way around a problem in Python, at least on a small scale. But yeah, I mean, I guess I feel like I always felt like I was missing a gestalt change, right? A real sea change in the way programming on databases were done.
Well, but I would say that like the industry, so you're right, like this async and reactive approach to development is very good for scaling. I would say you're in the exact same boat. So I work with a ton of graduates from the U of A, like some of them really smart cookies, like masters and doctorates in comp sci. They have no idea how to do reactive programming or multi-core programming. So
They don't
still
know.
very procedural in what they do because they're primarily a little bit mathematicians that have adopted coding. So you're right, like a purist comp sci person or somebody that's really going to optimize a big system, they would probably know reactive approaches to programming and stuff like that. But in reality, not a lot of people in the industry truly know how to do that stuff and do it very well. It gets very complicated when debugging that type of pattern because you get these conditions and you get like, so it's not, and you've probably seen it if you've tried to learn it. Yeah, it's great for scaling, but it's pretty hard to learn, to be honest.
It is.
You're not the only one that's like, wow, I'm looking at this and this stuff is super confusing. Yeah, it's super confusing. You're right. Yeah, 100%. 100%. Like the whole, if you look at JavaScript and like promises and like all of these like, you know, reactive asynchronous things, like, yeah, that's don't feel bad. That's actually pretty tricky to learn, and not a lot of people know it well. So what we've seen in so you don't necessarily have to learn that stuff. In the Python world, if you're doing big data processing and stuff like this, you tend to use some libraries like Spark is a big data processing library. You may or may not have heard of it. But the way that you code it in Python is you're programming it in such a way that you don't actually need to know that, under the hood, that's actually being broken up into this huge like execution graph. And it's doing all of this reactive stuff. And then it's, scheduling that on a cluster of 50 machines and aggregating it all together and coming back. So a lot of that stuff is abstracted away in some of these libraries. And you're right, still, if you want to do high performance stuff, you would have to write some of it on your own. But in some of the spaces, like this machine learning space, our machine learning developers would not know how to code very good reactive code. Like they wouldn't know it that well. But they do use libraries that, under the hood is definitely using that reactive stuff quite heavily to do the calculations. But it's lucky, like in the Python world, you have some great libraries that don't maybe an understanding of it. Like it sounds like you already have a preliminary understanding of like why we're doing it. And so as long as you understand that and just know like this library that you're using under the hood will be doing some of this stuff. And sure, you could probably squeak out an optimization if you wrote that kind of code. But it's complicated code to write and it's complicated code to maintain. And if you're working in a company and sharing it with other people, it's hard for them to read it. So I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say, to get too caught up in like, oh, this async stuff is complicated. Yeah, it definitely is. Like, don't feel bad. Even people doing this in industry right now are having a hard time like learning this paradigm. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you can get away with just using the libraries and not having to be a master in that stuff. But you are right. I feel strongly that paradigm is going to get more and more relevant just because I'm seeing it show up more and more. But you can still have a very healthy career in development and not have to go all academic and sort of learn how those are working in great detail.
Okay, that's it. I didn't realize. I've never actually used Apache Spark. So it abstracts most of that away, does it? Like
yeah, so you're actually lucky. Like, and so a lot of these frameworks are doing this too. Like I know a bit. I have similar background to you. Like learned Java and then, but I moved to the .NET, like the Microsoft world for a while, and then have the Python and did some Perl and stuff as well, Cobalt and things as well. So older languages. You're lucky in that. Like I think the designers of these frameworks know that the consumers, that most developers, this is tricky stuff for them and hard to learn. So a lot of them will abstract it away. So the code that you write, you'll kind of give your, you'll say, here's my data. I need this stuff summed together, and I need to know like the standard distribution of these numbers, and I want to aggregate this together. Some of these frameworks are very clever, and they can take what you're asking and compute, like they create like a computational graph. Yeah. And then under the hood, you don't even have to see this. They're breaking that all up into reactive stuff, scheduling it into the clusters, and then just bringing you back the result. So you don't really have to deal with like that complexity. So I'm just bringing up Spark. Spark is actually probably one of the more complicated ones of that. There are some nicer ones out there. Like a lot of stuff is built on Spark. In the machine learning, like in ML, you'll hear Data Factory is in Microsoft's cloud. Databricks is a system that does some of this stuff. It's all Spark under the hood, but you don't necessarily have to know about it. Like it just kind of happens for you. So that's nice. That's nice that you don't have to like deal with it. So yeah,
I'm gonna have to take a look at. I'm gonna have to look at Spark. I haven't yet because I've heard it's a heavy lift, and I always thought that like Node.js is kind of the native language for Spark, isn't it? Like
so Spark is written in Java, or it's either Java or C++ under the hood. That's a good question. A lot of that Apache stuff is Java under the hood, but it may use a lot of this stuff uses C++ at the end of the day because it needs to be lightning fast. So some of it's written in Java, but then some core components might be in C++. So all the Python libraries really do is they hand off to like Spark, which is running on the JVM or running in Java or running on C++. So Python just hands that off. So Python's not doing the work because Python's not a super fast language. It's handing it off to something that is a super fast language, and then just coming back with the result is typically what's happening.
Yeah. Okay. So I think maybe where I got this wrong, because I think I got the wrong idea in my head then about this stuff. So MapReduce, so Hadoop and stuff like that. So this is basically a pipeline for trying to parallelize stuff, so that it then becomes more accessible via conventional programming, procedural programming, object-oriented programming, stuff like that. I think, right? Am I wrong?
Mostly, it's trying to solve the problem. This is all kind of in this Spark realm as well. It's trying to solve the problem of big data and doing big data processing. Like banks have this problem quite a bit. All of the ATM transactions coming in on a minute-by-minute basis. It's pretty insane. And then they need to summarize that stuff very quickly. So I'll say MapReduce and Spark, these are great technologies. They're used in only certain industries. So they are like the Ferrari or the the Lamborghini of data processing. Those things can perform insanely well. But you're right, it's a bit of a heavy lift, like to set that stuff up and to maintain it and to learn it. It's not free, like it's complicated. So you'll see those used in certain industries heavily. Like we see it in finance. If you're doing like stock market analysis and stuff, they'll be using MapReduce and Spark and like all of these technologies because they need to process data super fast and they need to break this stuff down. Like oil fields and stuff, any kind of real-time decision-making stuff, like they'll have sensors on pipelines and stuff, and they need to use that. You can, though, other fields may not use the Ferraris. Like you could start learning, some of the technologies that are a little bit more approachable, and maybe they're like the Ford Focus of, or the Honda Civic of technologies, if you will. But like a lot of people own Honda Civics. So it's like not necessarily, a bad thing because they're easier to learn. And the companies that use them are like, we don't need a Ferrari. We don't need to go like 400 miles an hour here. We have a little bit of data that shows up every day. We just need to process it and create a report or something. So they'll use some other systems. A lot of stuff is moving to the cloud now. So there's systems in the cloud that do some of this stuff. Data Factory is one in Microsoft's cloud. Amazon has a couple as well that does some of this stuff. But to be honest, some of these companies just do it in raw Python. Like they'll write some Python functions to say, read a CSV. I'm not sure if you looked at the library Pandas. Like Pandas is a big library in Python for doing data processing. So even though Python doesn't perform that well, and Spark and MapReduce and all of these technologies would just destroy anything written in Python, you can still, for most use cases, you don't need to go 400 miles an hour. So a lot of companies, just because of ease of development, will still just use what you know. Like they'll just write Python code for a lot of this stuff. And and if you have experience in that, there is opportunity. You know, and honestly, if you're just looking for one inroad, you just need one inroad, and there's a lot of people just using this. Yeah, sure. Like there's that Spark and Hadoop. Yeah, there'll be some crazy high-end paying jobs in there. Like data engineers get paid quite a bit that really know that MapReduce and Spark and stuff. That's a pretty like prestigious position and hard to find good people for because it's so freaking hard to learn, to be honest. But if you're looking for an inroad, if you have Python experience and you've done some of this data stuff, that's more than enough to like get your foot in the door on some of these kind of things. And then maybe if you really like it, maybe go down the Spark path, like start learning that, maybe finding like there'd be some opportunities that probably are trying to adopt Spark, or they have some things in Spark and some things in not. Like that'd be a good opportunity to kind of see how it's done. So those things exist. Those jobs definitely exist. Like if you just know base Python and you have some data experience, those jobs definitely exist.
Okay, yeah.
I was just going to say, it'd be really great, Mike, if you could maybe touch on a little bit about what you might look for in a resume, or the skills and the abilities to kind of that you would maybe look to hire for, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we're kind of getting wonkish here, aren't we? So
going on. Well, at least
it's
valuable as well, right? So I can kind of talk about like what we would look for. So at the day job, we have a couple of different opportunities. So we're applied ML. So we're looking for a bunch of different people. And we have some programs as well that may be useful to you that I can kind of talk about. The one probably more useful to you immediately is we have what's called the AI lab. And it's basically taking people in your situation. You have some industry experience, you know some coding stuff, but you want to learn, you maybe want to get more into data processing or machine learning. And it's sort of like a 4-month thing. We've partnered with a couple of larger companies in Alberta. So who's in there now? We have Spartan Controls. They're a oil field control company. ATB, the bank, is in there as well. And there's a couple of other big profile ones. And the idea is it's a 4-month kind of semi-internship, but we don't target students fresh out of school. We actually want to target people with industry experience that want to get into this and maybe don't really know it all that well.
Where do I sign up?
I can send you the so I'll give you the inside track here. So we tried it in Calgary to start, and we took 2 cohorts there. So we just started it at the beginning of last year. I think it was. COVID has made time hard to think through. So yeah, we started at the beginning of last year in Calgary to start, and we took 2 cohorts of, I think it was 8 people each in there, and it worked out really well. And our goal is to get those people employed past that internship. So we're kind of, the reason we had it is we want to get more people in industry. And so we had like an 80 to 90% placement percentage after that internship of getting people in. So we want to take that and now apply it in Edmonton and some of these other cities. So we do have it in Calgary right now. We're all remote. The next cohort would start, where would the next cohort start? May, I think it would start like June or July. I can't remember. They're 4 months each. One would have started in January, ended in April. So the new one would have started just right now. So we're a couple months away from the next intake. That could be one good opportunity to go there. And what I could do is, I'm sure I can get your email from Ashley, or you send it to me. I can figure out like what we're kind of the skill sets that we're looking for that specific role to get in there. So we started last year as kind of a proof of concept, and it worked so well that we want to expand it now and get more people with industry experience like yourself, and a little bit of coding experience, get you up to snuff, and then like hand you over to some of these bigger companies. So that there could be a really good opportunity there. And you're in Edmonton, I assume, right?
St. Albert, but yes.
Yeah. Okay. So there we go. Yeah. So that the Edmonton cohorts, we're trying to start that lab up now in Edmonton as well. So I'll make a note to reach out to see like what the timelines for that are. I know we're just starting this up, and part of it is we want people in office, because to do a good mentorship, we want people working together so we can show people how stuff is done, and like it's hard remote to mentor people successfully, because it's sort of like you're not in the same room with them. So one of our goals with that program is we kind of want to get a cool space set up for people to come in and learn this stuff and then place. But COVID has been this giant pain in the butt in trying to get this done. So I know there's plans in July for people. So it may be coming in September. I can't promise anything because this stuff, we don't yet know when stuff will open up. But that could be a good opportunity, and I'll reach out for you, and I'll maybe send you that info as that stuff comes. So that's the first thing that we do. We also hire some traditional software developers. That would be more like building phone apps, building web apps. Right. So, that is an opportunity. It sounds like your heart's probably not there. Like that would be more of the JavaScript, but building websites, phone app kind of stuff. So fun for the people that love it, but not for everybody. So we have a couple of those people. And then we also have machine learning developers and interns. We have some senior ones, that requires a master's degree in statistics or doctorate level. We don't have many of those, but we have a handful of those people just to help us out on that. And then, we have a lot of machine learning developers that just have some knowledge in that field. So that would be a lot more on the applied statistics side of things and not the data side. So those guys are, they're given a CSV and they're just running statistical models against them all day. So they're in Python as well. So they'd be in Python and they'd be given a problem and they'd be trying to run statistical models and machine learning models against it. So that kind of job basically requires, we'll say, knowledge in AI and ML. You don't necessarily need a degree there, but so
more how to apply statistics, the statistical tools.
More applied statistics. So you could get there, like to get a job like that, even not with us, you don't have to go to school again for a 4-year statistics degree. Like there's a lot of really good materials online for doing some of that stuff. Like what's that one? I'm blanking here. Coursera. Like Coursera has some great applied statistics and AI and ML stuff. But what we would look for is definitely knowledge in that. So be able to pass a technical interview where people are like, what's linear regression, what's k-means, like what some of these techniques are. So familiarity with those techniques. And then if you have some kind of proof, so this is one bit of advice I could offer, like as long as you can show that you can do something, that can be successful. I know that's kind of chicken and the eggy, because it's like, well, before you get the job, how are you supposed to show that you know what you're doing? There are some ways into doing that. Like there is Kaggle is a website for doing competitions around, you might have heard of it, but it's like competitions on, there'll be a problem, like try to predict forest fires, and they'll give a data set out there, and then you can play around with that, see if you can come up with that. And people kind of compete to see if they can, how accurate they can be and stuff.
And you can win
and you
prizes.
Don't need to be first place in there, but just having an account there and showing in an interview that's like, hey, in my spare time, I've been doing some of this like Kaggle stuff. And I'm like 200th place on a couple of these things. But I mean, it's just proof that like you actually do, like you have the knowledge and you've been playing around with it and applying it as well. Some other people have had success, like GitHub is a good spot to store your source code and all of that. Yeah. Like just putting stuff up on GitHub, even if it's not your Mona Lisa, but having stuff on GitHub to say, hey, I'm playing around with this idea for trying to apply, this technology in law, and you put it up on GitHub, it doesn't even need to run. It's more so the whole, just showing that's like, hey, I have some code here. It's not full production code that I could sell for $1 million, but I've been playing around with this. And so if you have stuff like that, like GitHub with actual code, Kaggle competitions, where you're playing, you don't need to be like amazing, but like you're at least doing some of that stuff, that goes a long way. Like having that knowledge and then proof that like you've built a birdhouse kind of thing, like that kind of stuff is great in interviews, and it'll put you ahead of the game. I'm surprised a lot of the interviews that I'm in, a lot of people don't have that stuff. Like they've never posted their code to GitHub, or they've never done Kaggle. So when we see people with that, it's a big plus, because it shows that you've at least been trying to implement your knowledge a bit. And it doesn't, and again, it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to run, but just the showing that you can apply some of the knowledge instead of just being smart and answering a technical interview, because anyone can study for a test, but to show that you can like apply the knowledge goes a really long way and puts you, you know, significantly ahead of some of the other people.
Okay. So that was kind of related to what my next question was going to be with regards. Okay, so let's assume I apply for this internship, this AI lab thing. In preparation for that, I was going to ask, like, are there any particular MOOCs or anything like that that you would suggest? So Coursera, which is kind of the industry-driven MOOC platform, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. And so there's a course on there that everybody takes by Andrew Ng. I can't remember the specific name, but it's like the de facto introduction to machine learning and AI.
That's okay.
Yeah. So like even taking that course, it's just a great course because it's an overview of all these techniques. So it would at least then in an interview, if somebody's like, yeah, what do you know about supervised versus unsupervised learning? Yeah, it's covered like in that course. And you don't have to be an expert and go into the nitty gritty of it, but just having awareness. And sometimes that's the first step, because if you don't know what to learn yet, that's a problem. So this course is good that it just like, here's a technique, this is kind of what it does. And then it moves to another technique and what it does. So then from there, you could deep dive. There'd be other courses and stuff like that. Like if you want to do computer vision and the natural language processing stuff. So law uses a lot of NLP, natural language processing stuff. Yeah. Stanford is the go-to university for that stuff. Their courses on computer vision and natural language processing, all open source. You can take the assignments, you can watch all the courses. They're really good. They you would have enough knowledge to understand it as long as you know some base statistics and stuff like that. Like you don't have to be a coding master. It's mostly just applied statistics and math. And then, you know, the stuff that you don't know, there'd be courses on. I'm not sure if you played a lot with linear algebra, but a lot of this, when you get more complicated machine learning and AI, it's calculus and linear algebra quite heavily.
Yeah.
But you don't have to go that deep. Like that would be very specialized. Computer vision is a very specialized field of it's the cool one because everybody likes to see videos where your face has been transplanted on somebody else. It's super cool.
Well, it's almost a robot.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Machine vision is super cool. It makes for the best demos, unlike the other ones that are a little more boring. But it's just specialization. You don't have to learn it in order to get good at this stuff. So.
Okay, so that was kind of my question. So like you can invest a lot of time in these MOOCs and stuff like that, and I have in the past, and you don't get any sense that it goes anywhere. But some of these are well recognized. Is that right? Like this Andrew Ng, like I would say that would be a reach for me. For me, like I think he deals with advanced machine learning stuff, doesn't he? I think he's got an introductory course.
His intro class would be a bit more approachable. I think he does have some other stuff where he really deep dives in. So and it really depends on what inroad that you want. So it sounds like if you wanted to be more data focused, you don't necessarily need to go into machine learning and AI. Like data and data processing is used heavily in machine learning and AI. It's also used heavily in other fields that are not machine learning and AI. So if your focus was like that data stuff, what I would say then is if you have an industry that you love, and it sounds like maybe you're just looking for an inroad, so you don't necessarily have an industry that you love, but you could take a look at job postings for roles that you would love to have, sort of thing, and they'll kind of dictate, are they using Spark? Are they using Python? You'll be able to see kind of what technology stacks that you're doing, and you don't have to know all of them. So what might make sense is to target the commonalities of that stuff, and then, you know, put some stuff on GitHub, go to some of those Coursera's or whatever, maybe learn Spark if that's the big one, or learn pandas in Python. If you're in pandas and you want to do data work, or if you're in Python and you want to do data work, pandas is pretty big. Like there's some great O'Reilly books that you could slowly go through, make your way through. But yeah, what's probably more useful is just to show that you've done some of that stuff. And like, that's a great way to get inroads. And I would also say, if this was not COVID times, there's some great startups. One of our guys at AltaML, he runs the data science startup or meetup group at Mercer, And there are headhunters that attend a lot of those groups. And their whole reason is they want to talk to some people after the meetup group. So when COVID lets up and that stuff opens up again, just going to those talks, sometimes the talks are interesting, sometimes they're a bit of a yawn fest. So I don't know, you might have to sit through some pretty boring ones.
Yeah, I've been to a couple.
It's mostly getting to know the people there, because there's a lot of people there that are not there to learn. They're there to try to find the people that are learning that thing. So some of those data meetup groups and stuff like that, you'll find recruiters will show up to those a lot, and getting to know those recruiters and things like that, all of a sudden, like, those opportunities start opening up. So I don't know what it looks like in COVID times. Like, I think some of them are doing it remote. It's not as effective right now. And then
it's not the same.
Yeah, it's definitely not the same. And then, like, the last approach that might be really good is, I'm not a super good social media person at all. I'm terrible at it, but LinkedIn is pretty effective for the people that use it. And even putting together a LinkedIn profile with some basic stuff in there. I think there's ways, I don't do this, but there are ways of sharing and posting stuff. So this is a bit of a, like, marketing yourself play a little bit. Like, there's a bit of this, like, personal branding and marketing that can help you get into some of this stuff. But so it's a bit of a game. I was never a big fan of it, but it is effective and it will get you some inroads. But like, setting up that LinkedIn and to be honest, if you go into Fiverr, there are people for dirt cheap that can set up a professional looking LinkedIn profile for you. So even if you didn't want to do the work, you can find somebody, like, overseas that will, like, set this stuff up for you, and it'll look good. And then finding people in the industries that you want to be in and just message them and just say, hey, really like your company. I'm like looking at getting into this stuff. Do you guys have any opportunities? It's a bit salesy because you're kind of cold calling here a little bit, but it's actually pretty effective, much to my chagrin. I didn't think that was effective, but we've hired a couple of people just because they've messaged our CEO or they've messaged, like, the right person saying, hey, I'm looking to get in this, and we happen to be taking in interns, and we were looking for some interns. So it's a bit of a grind, the LinkedIn thing. You'll probably send like 100 messages, and maybe 2 people will say something nice and everybody else will ignore you. But that's just the nature of that kind of way of doing it. But it is also a way to, like, get yourself in, because all you really need is you get yourself that one inroad, and then you build a year of experience or two years of experience. Now you're building up your resume and CV. It gets way easier. It's like the first couple of jobs are going to be the hardest. The first job's almost the hardest, but then once that experience starts building up, people will start coming to you eventually. But it's just that first job, that first inroad, like you're saying, that's the hardest one to get. But you just need to get the one. You grind until you get the one, and then it gets easier past that point. So
I think, okay. So here's, I think maybe, so 10 years ago, looking in the Edmonton market for work, there was a big, I got the impression there was a big disconnect between my Python, open source, MySQL background and what people were using. Like, everything seemed to be a Microsoft shop.
Yeah.
And by the way, I've now appreciate that because I'm running a Microsoft shop. It's terrible, but
oh, that's funny.
but I mean, but like Gateway, I mean, you're trying to leverage scarce resources and you're just thrown into a mix, and then you're given this automated platform that is basically like a mothership that does everything for you. I mean, it's no wonder it's like this. I mean, essentially the work has been automated away, and then when an organization like this, so Ashley, so. So with regards to this app we're developing, so suddenly you're stuck in a situation where people don't really have the background to tackle some problems because, like, all of this work has been automated away. They haven't had to deal with it. These are muscles that have never been exercised, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's what happened to Edmonton a number of years ago, and I maybe it's changed since then. Maybe I have kind of. I think it probably has. Like, about 5 years ago, I was in a room full of CIOs I was invited to, and they were talking about how they were having trouble finding people to develop apps for them because that just didn't exist in the market. And it turns out that like all of their businesses, this was the future of all their businesses. Like, you should have hired me 5 years ago. And now, so there was this disconnect outside, like in the world at large. You saw all kinds of like Python data science jobs. They're now here in Edmonton. These jobs are here now. Like that's is it a thing?
So I'd say no. So I'll tell you about the industries a little bit. Edmonton is a government town. Most of our IT jobs is with government. Just is what it is. Government will be all Microsoft, just because Microsoft salespeople are really good and the government's on the Microsoft stack. You'll see a ton of .NET and Microsoft in Edmonton. It tends to be that way for Calgary too. It's more oil and gas in Calgary. So Calgary's private industry, oil and gas. There'll be a little bit more Java there. Tends to be a lot of Microsoft though, because they are like, well, even here in Edmonton. So PCL is Microsoft's 5th biggest company in Canada for cloud usage. So like it's all Microsoft stuff. So
right.
I would say that like Edmonton will be a lot of Microsoft stack stuff. We don't have that many startups in Edmonton. We maybe have like Jobber, although they're pretty well established. There's some small startups. Startups will tend to use Python and things like this. One of the goals with the startup that I'm involved in is we have all these smart Python people and we have no jobs for them. So one of the goals of the startup that I was at is like, well, why is that? We would lose all of our smart Python cookies to Silicon Valley because they do use that stuff. But COVID has been nice in that it doesn't matter necessarily where the job is anymore in IT. So Microsoft, so for example, the big companies like the FANG companies, I think they call them, like Facebook and Apple and all that in Silicon Valley, they know that companies are going to be opening and making people come back into an office. And they are poaching everyone in Edmonton and Calgary that don't want to go back to an office anymore. So Microsoft has recruited a couple of our people. So it'll be like that for jobs that need Python as well in Silicon Valley and New York. Actually, they're starting to see the benefit of going to Canada because you have to pay a developer like $300,000 a year in Silicon Valley. And you might say that's a ton of money, but your rent could be like $10K a month in Silicon Valley. So it sounds like a lot of money, but after you pay for your expenses, you're probably not making, So the big IT companies, the big IT companies are starting to see an opportunity in Canada to say, hey, while everybody's working remotely, why don't we pay Canadian talent, even if they paid Canadian talent $150,000 a year, that's half price. And as a Canadian, person, that's not a bad salary at all. So everybody's kind of happy here, right? So yes, I would say if you're looking for a butt-in seat Edmonton job, they're mostly in the Microsoft stack. It's starting to change because of data and machine learning. That stuff is still very Python focused. So a lot of companies are being forced to adopt Python, but it's not like their primary tech. It's a lot of the .NET stuff. So yeah, you're bang on. You're right. There's not a lot of that stuff in Edmonton. Vancouver's a little better. Vancouver has a bigger startup community. They're closer to Seattle. So there's a lot more startup stuff, a lot of Python, Amazon, AWS, and Amazon, which are big Python shops. They're in Seattle. So Vancouver naturally gets like a lot more of that stuff. Toronto has a lot more Python, just bigger city. They have a lot more of that stuff. Waterloo, Google is in Waterloo outside of Toronto. They're big Python. So they're in Waterloo.
Yeah. So
there's a lot more there. I would say if you want to be in the Python space, there is opportunities like AltaML that this internship could be something. But you don't necessarily have to look for work in Edmonton. If you're okay working remotely, sky's the limit. You could just look in Europe. You could look in North America. There's some companies, TopTel, I can recommend this because I've used this one in the past. There's a company called TopTel. They have a pretty strong vetting process. So you'd have to get good at your Python and practice it because their interview process is they'll really hammer you on the Python stuff. If you could get through it, and it may take a couple of attempts, they will place you anywhere in the world for Python for remote work. I've been on their roster before, and we also use them to hire people. they are so busy right now that they said that like it takes them 3 weeks for them to find us somebody, because all of their people are like getting jobs and working. So like, and that's just one of those companies. There are companies like TopTal that will find you work anywhere in the world. Like you'll say, I know Python, you'll have to do your you'll have to do some kind of test or something. So like I would recommend, like, you know, sharpen your fangs a bit on the Python or wherever it is you want to go. And they'll hire different kind of people, right? Like if you were into that JavaScript front end phone app stuff, yeah, like they can hire for that too. But you could find one of those companies. And then this whole problem of like, yeah, Edmonton doesn't have a lot of Python data people. You're right, but that's now no longer a problem because you kind of have access to like anywhere. So
yeah, we're so Gateway Association has this big thing on digital literacy and working online and stuff like that. And
I wonder if it'll be.
I have to admit, I'm not the best at the social media myself, and I freaking hate that stuff.
Yeah, you will.
But
well, I just want to be really mindful of everybody's time.
Right.
So we have hit the hour mark. So I just want to say thank you, Mike, very much for joining for the mentorship. Greatly appreciate your time.
Yeah, for sure. And like Kevin, we can keep in touch. I'll reach out on that mentor, on that AI lab stuff. I don't know when it's coming to Edmonton. We're hoping September, so there might be some opportunity there as well.
Okay.
But even, yeah, if you have any questions, or you know you're learning some Python stuff, you know, even if you had any questions around that stuff, more than willing to help out. Like get your foot in the door here on something, because I think you just, if you put your nose to the grindstone and try 100 things, you'll definitely find something. Your skill set, if you know Python, you have some of that statistics and stuff. There's definitely inroads out there. It's just going to be you know, turning over the rocks until you find the first one. So that's always the trick.
Yeah. So for the record, like I am familiar with Pandas and NumPy and those ones.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah. Okay. So you're already ahead of the game. Yeah. So those are used quite heavily. And if you have experience with that, it's definitely work with people that know that stuff. So that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm a ninja at it or anything like that, but
I don't know if anybody's a ninja. Some of those are so complicated that like to be a ninja probably requires reading a Bible of.
It turns Python into Perl in terms of like, you know.
Isn't that, you're right? Isn't that funny? Like how all these old things kind of become new again a little bit, but. Yeah,
like Python, neat readable language becomes, there's a zillion ways to do something, and nobody can read anybody else's code. So.
Yeah, I know.
But it's great, and I do have a project that I'm working on. I don't have it online on GitHub. I should probably do that. There may be there's probably nothing patentable there. So, but
yeah, but you know what? Even throwing it up and it's part of your like online portfolio.
Yeah,
no harm, right?
It would be more valuable. Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. If you had $1 million idea, you probably don't want to make that public. But even snippets of stuff might as well. Like if it's not patentable, it at least could be resume piece, or it could be, you know, one of the portraits you hang up to show off, right? So yeah, probably useful. But,
yeah, no, I should definitely do that. And yeah, I would be very interested in that AI lab, and I will take a look at some of that Andrew Nig applied statistics stuff and prep for it, and look around at some of this other stuff. So.
Well, and what I can do is I can send an email connecting both of you so that you have each other's contact information.
Sure.
And thank you, Mike. It was a lot of really great resources that you're able to offer. So super awesome, super appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. And like, yeah, definitely keep in touch. I'm always open to a conversation, even you know, talk tech and stuff like that. I enjoy it. So it was great meeting you.
Yeah, you too. No, that was good. Thank you.
You bet.
I feel less bad. I feel less bad now.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think you're in a lot better shape than you might think. Like, you definitely have some skill sets here that are useful. So, yeah.
Okay.
Well, best of luck. Take care.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thanks. Okay. No, that was.
I'm just gonna pause.
That was really